Hi there, and welcome to the Mindful Marathon podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Quirk, a run coach and pediatrician. Mindful Marathon is all about helping runners of all types to run their own race. Whether you are a seasoned runner or you're just getting started, I want to let you know that you're welcome here and that you're in the right place. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Marathon podcast. Today, I have a very special guest with me. I have my friend and fellow athlete, Dr. Amelia Bueche, who is a lifelong runner and triathlete, an osteopathic physician specializing in neuromusculoskeletal medicine, and a coach devoted to helping people reclaim their health and live in alignment with their full potential. She is the founder of This Osteopathic Life, which includes a podcast, which we'll link later, CME programs, and immersive coaching experiences that help participants reconnect with their body's purpose and power. And I am very excited to talk to her. So, Amelia, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so before we were chit-chatting about all of the different directions this can take, so we're not sure where it's going to go. But
Yeah, pluripotent. Let's do this. We'll see.
I'm wondering if maybe can we start? Can we go back to your interest in athletics and sort of the life that you had, perhaps it feels like many years ago, and
Oh, sure.
we'll talk about that first and see where this goes.
Yeah, I know it's 44 years, so that could take the whole podcast itself. But a couple of things stand out to me. I'm the youngest of six, and my siblings had different levels of activity. None were super particularly athletic. I had one brother who did run all through high school and even in college. And so that was probably my prime influence into running. And there was a race that happened literally from my doorstep when I was little. And I remember I had this picture that was up in my house, like crossing the finish line. I looked so exhausted, right? And it was maybe the kids' fun run, maybe it was a 5K, I don't even know. But my priest ran it. And I also thought, wow, like priests can run. So like here we are at this space. And it just seemed like this natural part of life. And in middle school, I played all the sports you could in elementary school. I wore stonewashed jean shorts to play floor hockey and pink sweatpants for softball. And I was decent, at most of them. And I ran in middle school and I loved track and I loved the relays. And I was a sprinter at that point in time because it was kind of that, basketball, volleyball, track, trifecta. And I got to high school and I had spent the summer away playing music in Europe and I kind of missed a lot of the basketball pregame. And I got to tryouts and I didn't make the team. And they even kept two teams that year. And I didn't go to a very big school. I was at the low rank. And my brother, my running brother, had said to me, hey, if you don't make basketball, you have to at least give cross country one season. And at that point in time, 3 miles sounded crazy to me, other than, my little kid 5K doing that for fun and probably popsicles along the way. And I said, all right, like, let me just give it a go. I'll do something. I might as well stay active. And I remember the very first race, I couldn't finish it. And thank goodness my mom had not completed my physical. So I wasn't allowed to cross the finish line. And I was so grateful because I had all these cramps, right? And I was like, oh my God, like I'm dying. And so I couldn't cross the finish line for multiple reasons. And I thought, well, that's not cool because I wasn't a person who couldn't do things or that I didn't identify with that. And so I said, I have to figure this out. And running was a really curious space because the way to get better at running is to just run, right? And there was a girl in our town, in our district, in our league who just crushed it, right? 17-minute 5Ks. And we always saw her running everywhere. And later I was like, oh, like, yes, she had some natural talent in a runner's build and all those things, but also she just ran a lot. And I played volleyball that year. I did make the B team, right? So I just eked in for the off season. That was back in Michigan when volleyball was in the winter time. And then track. And I still love track. And at that point, my coach then said, you're no longer a 100-meter sprinter, right? Like you have to move up if you're a cross country kid. And I still love the relays. And thankfully, at least in Michigan, I don't know if this is ubiquitous throughout the United States, we had 4 relays, right? The 4x8, 4, 2, and 1. And I could run the longer 3 distances. I was for sure no longer a sprinter in that capacity. And the 800 and the mile, all of that was really great. And so from there on out, I really was a runner. And what a great gift to not have made that basketball team because I would have, again, maybe ridden the bench, but I got to be a really good runner. And between freshman and sophomore year, I ran almost every day with Steve Miller Band in a Walkman, with
A
fuzzy
Walkman.
headphones,
Oh,
a
wow.
Walkman for sure, right? In my hand. And I just ran as long as that cassette would carry me. And I got better, and then I was like the first run on the team. I thought, wow, like that's really interesting. And so I ran all through high school and kind of got burned out by the end because 8 seasons of running and calcaneal stress fractures and all those pieces really didn't serve me. And so I pivoted to rowing. I had some running offers in college and I thought I want to be active, but I think that's too much. And also you had to wear a little underwear to run in college, and that was not going to work for me. And so I rowed, and it was actually really complementary to running. And actually, at the end of my freshman year, rowing didn't work out for a variety of reasons. And I did the team and training marathon. So I went back to my running roots as a freshman in college. And I did it up in Alaska, the Mayor's Midnight Sun Run. And I ran it totally just like, hey, I'm going to do this run. And I had a disposable camera. Again, this is like dating me, Walkmans and
This is so
disposable
cool.
cameras and Ziploc bags. And I ran it, and there were moose on the trail. And I ran it somewhere, just under 4 hours. And I sat down afterward, which is a really big mistake. You should not be still. And I was waiting for other teammates to finish, and an hour later, and I could barely walk. But I thought that was actually, pretty fun. And in medical school and in college, I kept running and rowing and doing things just on my own, not necessarily as competitively. And then the summer between undergrad and med school, I gave triathlons a go, and I did pretty well. And I actually took a year off to race triathlon and tore my ACL a week into that year off. So the universe, I think, was pushing me back to medicine because I probably would have just stayed in the athletic realm for quite some time. But alongside medicine, I did race for about 15 years competitively in triathlon. And the run was certainly where I gained my space back. I could swim decently and I could bike pretty well, but I could pick people off on the run, and I really appreciated that. And so I raced, locally, won a lot of local triathlons and some local running races, and pivoting to cross training, kind of CrossFit-esque training, actually helped me to compress the time of my training and to stay successful. And I actually ran my fastest 5K. The first time I ever went under 20 minutes was in my 30s, so it's really interesting to see where we can go with that. And now I run more when I can. And because I can, that ACL injury that's now 23 years old, right, has, shown itself, and my knee does not tolerate running as much. And so it's been a recalibration to, working out less for the bib and the finish line and the medal, and more just for the enjoyment of it, and really reshaping that identity. So that might be a really long
No,
pathway to
that
where we are now, but that's kind of the beginning, from front porch 5Ks to now, swimming and running in my backyard again.
yeah. Well, what stands out in your story is that it feels like you were sort of always an athlete, maybe like growing up, and like that was not how it was for me. I definitely did not identify as an athlete until more
Mm-hmm.
recently. But
Yeah.
and I was not on any sports teams, and I was like not a runner at all, and I thought that the cross country team was crazy. But what I was thinking when you were
What everybody
going,
else does for punishment.
yes, yes. You know, I
Uh,
wonder when you were going to do, triathlon and do competitive triathlon, like if you hadn't torn your ACL, where would we be? I wonder.
oh, for sure. That is a massive sliding door moment. And it, I would say it haunts me. It just, intrigues me. It keeps me curious. And and we don't know, but honestly, if I were to, speculate, I think I would have stayed in the realm of athletics and maybe gone back to medicine, maybe in a different realm, maybe would have done orthopedics myself. I don't know.
Mhm.
But,
Wow.
because I was quite good off the bat. I did my first race with a hybrid bike and I did all right, but I was like, that's pretty good. And then I got this, I got a road bike, and again, all the stories we could tell. I bought it and I never had a fancy road bike before. And I was traveling from Michigan to California to do this race, like in the midst of this road trip, as you do when you're,
Wow.
20
Okay.
years old.
Yeah.
And it was a all women's half Ironman, because why not? Of course, that's what you should do for your
Yeah.
second ever triathlon. We could
No
talk
big
about that,
deal.
And I do have I have some capacity because I think I just train all the time, and I can, fit for anything has kind of been a theme in my life. And so we get there, and I asked the bike shop, I said, I don't know how to change a bike tire. And they're like, this bike doesn't get flats. And I was like, what? Is this some magical alien bike enigma? And I was like, okay. And sure enough, right, I'm in this race. I swam pretty well. I was in a river with the current, which highly recommend. We've talked about swims and triathlons, right? That's one way to go because it just scoots you along. And it was, just point to point. So it was a great opportunity there. I get on the bike and I'm going, right? I'm like halfway through. I'm like, this is amazing, right? And then all of a sudden I can't climb this hill. And I first was like, okay, I'm just tired. And I look back, man, right, that is a squishy tire. And I figure I'm done because I don't know how to change a bike tire, which
Yeah.
again, don't recommend, although also like don't love changing a tire anyway. And thank goodness these people were just out on a ride, and they happened to stop and change my tire for me. It's like, okay, I'm going to ride this and get it going. Couple miles later, flat again. It's probably a pinch flat, right? Because let me tell you, there are no bikes that don't get flat tires unless, right, they're like solid tires. It can't happen if there's air involved. And so then I figure I'm for sure done, right? And I get to an aid station. Some woman had crashed her bike, unfortunately, but then she's like, "Here, have my spare tube," and like, let's change it again. So I'm like, "Oh, geez," because at this point, it's
Yeah.
many, 20, 30.
I'm
And then I ride again, and the other tire goes flat. I'm like, "This is absurd." And so another person helps me. I'm like, "This is obnoxious, right?" And probably the people waiting for me think something has gone wrong because we're not even cell phone ages at this point, and it's hours, right? Like hours from when I should have been in. And I ride in and I get to the end and like I still have a flat tire. And I was like, this one, I'm just riding it. I'm gonna ride on the rim of this bike. And it's silly. And then I go and I run and I still ran decently well, right? And ate a lot of Oreos and drank some Coke on the way. But I still loved it, right? Even with like this 4 hour bike delay and all these flats, I was like, that was really great. And I think, right, had my bike not malfunctions, I would have been really good at that. And so I went back, I returned the bike. I said, you can have it. Like, no, thank you. And I got a new one and knock on wood, I have not flatted in a race since then. I never did again. I think I got them
wow.
all out of the
You got them
way
all out of the way,
in
knock
that
on
moment.
wood. I had a
And so I
flat
thought,
my
oh, let me
first sprint
explore
try
them.
too. I got a flat
See,
tire. Yeah.
I don't know. It's some kind of karmic like preparation just to know it can happen. And I took that year off, and it was literally a weekend. So I was like, what am I going to do? And so thankfully I was able to put it together, with medical school, and probably thank goodness. I think it really maintained my sanity throughout that time. But I do wonder, what would have happened. And a woman I raced with in that very first shorter race, was on the hybrid bike. We were kind of same. And then she became a professional triathlete. So I almost watched what my life would have been, right? Like she was a trainer and we lived in the same area. And, we had gone to the same undergrad. I was like, like what would that have been like? Probably like that.
Yeah.
And she trained and raced and coached people and seemed to really enjoy life. And I would see her at races and she definitely got faster than me, right? Because she spent most of
Well,
her time there, but I wasn't so far off, right? Having to put medical school alongside it. And one other time I tried to jump ship intern year, so I got through medical school, right? Putting the racing alongside it and it worked. In intern year, I did not love family medicine, and about halfway through, I was like, not for me. And I went, kind of handshake to my DME and said, like, this is great. I'm going to go. And, because I triathlon, I was still racing and I was like, I'm going to be a personal trainer and it's going to be fine. And he said, well, you did this whole med school thing, so maybe don't leave entirely. And we actually opened my residency as a result. We found this space to create a full-time neuromusculoskeletal medicine residency. And that made more sense. It kind of fit more of how I understood medicine. And it, I think, made sense with my life and lifestyle as well. So for a few times, right, I've tried to alternate that. I'm wearing right now like a CrossFit gym shirt from a place I hopped into in
yeah.
Nebraska and became a
Yeah.
gym owner, during my attendingship years. So it's always been alongside because never one thing is a theme in my life. But yeah,
You've
had that
always
torn
had
ACL
a
not
toe in the
happen.
pool.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, what would my racing have been like had I had two legs, right, that were as strong as my left leg? Because you can rehab it, but it's not the same. The
Yeah.
circumference of my quads is less. And so just wondering too, like, like with a full power leg, how else might it have
Yeah.
been? But we don't know.
Well,
We don't
one
know.
of the themes we were exploring it was, adapting to new paces in life. And I
Hmm.
think,
Hmm.
knowing your history now and
Yeah.
knowing all of this, I just, how do you kind of, for my people out there who maybe, I mean, the simplest thing I can think of is just a time off season, like an injury
Hmm.
or a busy time in life where they have to take time away from this thing that is usually like first and
Hmm.
foremost and at the center, or always training for a race or always having
Hmm.
like an A goal.
Hmm.
How do you step back from that? I mean, it's one thing if you're forced, like with an injury, I suppose, but another to make
Yeah.
that choice.
Well, it's so interesting. I was listening to a podcast, I think it was Tony Robbins the other day, and he was talking about Michael Jordan, who was saying, like, I don't have to be better than anybody else. I just have to be better than myself, which is really interesting when you're the greatest basketball player of all time. And I think there's merit in that, but also danger in that, right? Because if you are, right, the greatest basketball player of time, or I listen a lot to Abby Wambach, and, if your identity was the top goal scorer in all of soccer ever, and then, right, you're no longer doing that. What does that mean? And who are you? So while
Yeah.
I think that's fair from the comparitis, right, standpoint of not trying to be someone else other than you, especially when you have a historical background in racing, for example, or even like any ascension in pace, right? Like you have gotten better at something. And then, like you said, you get sidetracked by life, by pregnancy, by an injury, by a career, just by time or distance or whatever it is. When you come back and you no longer can run at the pace you were used to, it is a wild identity crisis. And what do you do with that? Do you stop running entirely? Do you make peace, with not running? Do you stop racing because you don't want that recorded, right? You don't want to share your Strava, with the new paces and times. And I think that's something to really think about. And even to say it is okay, right? Like I don't have to be better than the me yesterday. I have to say what do I want and need today? And what is it actually about running that brings me the most joy? And if it really is the pace, maybe it is like reconsider, right? Maybe you don't need races anymore. And maybe it is, something else. Maybe running is like kind of your joy and leisure, and you put your competitive energy into something else, right? So if
Hmm.
it, for me, and I have friends who say that, like, why not just, keep racing? And I honestly said, like, if I'm not showing up to win, I don't really want to do the race. And that could sound really mean or egotistical, but that was the point for me, right? If I was showing up to a race,
Yeah.
it was because I wanted to do well. And it wasn't necessarily just for, the space or the location or the swag, although the swag is nice, right?
Yeah.
And you get to keep choosing that too. For me, some of it is I swim and bike and run because I enjoy it. Like I just like to do those things. And
Hmm.
I even thought like, man, I don't want to pay money to do them, right? Like it's kind of silly.
You don't have
And
to.
that's
Yeah.
right now, right? That's silly for me right now. For 15 years, I paid a whole lot of money, right? Because I wanted to sign up and see where I stood and win races and stand on podiums. And that was okay. And to recalibrate that in a year, maybe it's 2 years now. Time is very fluid
Yeah.
in the post-pandemic space. There was an interesting race up on Mackinac Island. I was like, you know what? I want to register for that one. And there were two distances. And first my brain says, do the long one, right? Because if you're going to pay money, do the longer one. I was like, nope, I want to go and like run the shorter one. And I won my age group and it was really nice, right? And I appreciated it was like a hand carved medal. It was a turtle race. I love turtles. And so that one I checked in and I said, I like this one, and it wasn't even just, could I win? I had no thought of winning anything because my pace was much slower than it had been.
Hmm.
But that one I did say, I do want to be registered for this race and I do want to participate. And I want the silly vest with the hood, like
Yeah.
all of those things. And really, for the most part, other than that, I have not felt interested. I'll check in, right? There's a lot of local races where I am, and I'll stop and say, like, do I want to do that? And most of the time, the answer is no. And that's okay too. So you're allowed
Hmm.
to shift and change and recalibrate that. And just remember, like, you don't have to compete with the you of any version, right? You get to decide with the you today what it is I love about this. And if it still can come from running in a different pace, great. And if you want, right, that competitive drive, maybe you need to run for fun and, become a competitive, like, speed card game player, right?
Yeah. No, you're
Get
right.
creative with it.
I've coached a few runners who were very, they were very accomplished as high school or college runners and athletes. And yeah, and like even to have someone who is like a short distance runner and then sign on for something like a half marathon or a marathon, and it's like it's
Mm-hmm.
a totally different way to train, but also letting go of those paces from like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes 20 plus years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
That yeah, like the training is not the physical training is not where the work needs to be done usually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's
and
all
it will
up
make,
here.
it'll make a whole difference in your enjoyment of the experience because you're going out thinking like I want to get my PR and you don't, it's not going to be enjoyable, right? And if you go
Yeah.
out there to say, and so I constantly remind myself on the days I am able to run, it's literally that. I'm like, I'm grateful I can run today, right? Like my knee is tolerating running. I'm
Mhm.
moving my body. I'm running by water, like this is like those are the things that really make the run worth it. And I will sometimes not time it at all, right? Just because I think it's actually probably gonna make me feel worse
Yeah,
to know how long
especially
this is
right
taking
now in the
me.
heat.
Yeah, exactly. Or sometimes I'll time it and just say, oh, that's interesting. Or maybe, I ran negative splits, even though like the baseline of the splits, was slower than I might have liked it to be. Or else shifting the focus. So I coach now little kids, right? Like elementary school
Yeah.
track, which we could talk a whole episode on that. When kids show up and like, we have to run. And I was like, well, it's cross country. That's pretty much all we got.
That's what we do
But
here.
shifting the focus there, right? Like how
Yeah.
can I share running in different ways with other people? And then when I do want, right, like more competition, I might find a different challenge, whether it's athletically or otherwise, because you might still have competitive drive, but to
Hmm. Hmm.
relocate it and let running still hold its joy for a different reason.
Yeah. And I think for me, I would never have found swimming if I wasn't sort of forced that way because of an injury. Like it was like a dumb injury. Like I sprained my ankle in my garden and I
Yeah.
couldn't run for a period of time. And it was like, well, what am I going to do with all this energy? Like, all right, well,
Hmm.
I guess I could try swimming. And then I ended up
Yeah.
enjoying that and doing some
Hmm.
races with that. And like, again, I'm not very fast. I'm quite an average
Hmm.
swimmer, but like now gone, long distances with
Hmm.
swimming, which is something that was not even on my radar 10
Yeah,
years ago.
absolutely. Yeah. Fast is not the only measure, of
Yeah.
success in running,
Yeah,
unless obviously you're going for an Olympic medal.
exactly.
There's other ways to be successful in that space. And I shared with you a little bit before we hit record. I'm a musician as well. Like I shared, that kind of cost me my basketball career, probably in the best way. And I had to redecide for myself. I had a gap in music and like most things, right? If you have a gap, like you lose some of that progress, and you can make it up some, but it's just different. And for a while I re-entered and I played in professional symphony, which was great, but also so stressful, right? It's like, okay, I achieved this thing. I can see I can hang, but do I want to? There was also that piece of like, is it worth it? And it made music all that much less enjoyable and just more stressful. Like, don't mess up, right? Don't be the weak link. And how do you show up here? And so I'm glad I did it, right? I'm glad I said I, went
Yeah.
there and achieved this, bucket list thing. And then I, was asked to recommit. And I thought, you know what? No, I want music to again be joyful for me. And so I play in an orchestra that's, again, I don't know how to say this nicely. Like, it's music that's relatively easy for me, right? Compared to other things. And so I can play it well, within
Yeah.
the level where I am and have so much fun, and it's, it doesn't feel stressful. I can show up and just play on the day, like I can
Yeah.
prepare as much as I want or don't want to. And as my director's listening, like, I hope I'm still doing a good enough job. But just recognizing that as well and saying, you know what, I still love my cello. Like, I don't want to shift instruments, although I do play violin with my daughter, which again is kind of comical. But to say I still want to show up in that space. And
Yeah.
again, I reprogram my brain to say, nope, you're not going to play in the professional symphony. I went and watched them and I said, yeah, like, that's too many notes, right? I don't want to be responsible for that many notes. But these in this group, and it's shorter, right? It's shorter term and,
Yeah.
lower bar, low stress. Yes, please, because I still love music. And so it allows me to be musical
Hmm.
and checking with that too. So as your athletes are calibrating their goals, right? It's like, are these again enhancing your enjoyment? Because some of it might be, it'll make me run more to have this goal and just
Hmm.
checking in energetically that's feeding me. Or
Yeah.
it's like, oh my gosh, right? I have put this target here and now I hate everything about it. And so
Yep.
checking in how you can make again running the most enjoyable for you for whatever that target is that you want to reach.
No, I think that's important. And I'm hearing my niece's voice in my head after. So we ran a very fun race in Disney in November last year.
Mm-hmm.
And that was her first half marathon, her first time like training for a long distance. And I
Mm-hmm.
would say, I mean, that was really fun. Like, it was really
Yeah.
hot, so we went really slow, but it was very
Mm-hmm.
fun. And after this crazy triathlon that Tony and I just did, we were talking to my niece and she was like, "Well, Auntie Em, was it fun?" And I was like, "Grace, parts of it were fun, but not as much fun like running in the moment because it was so hot and just the
Mm-hmm.
conditions were not great." And she was like, "Oh, well, I don't really want to do a race like that. I want to do the Disney race where we had fun every mile." And I was like, "Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I hear you."
Yeah. And I think there's moments there too. So I don't know, we're taking all the branches here. So swimming, right? So we'll take the swimming from that triathlon moment. And same thing, like, I'm not the best swimmer. I can hang, and I've swum a lot in open water and I love it. It's actually, again, it's one of my happiest places. I think clearly, right? I enjoy it. If I can get to the water most days, that's great.
Yeah.
And 2 years, again, I'm just going to say two because that's whatever. Around that same time, a couple of months prior to when I did that race on Mackinac Island, which is beautiful. If nobody's been to Northern Michigan, it's a lovely place to visit. It's an 8 mile circumference, so it's a lovely distance to swim, bike, or run. But the swim part, so you can swim around Mackinac Island one day of the year, and you can't totally
Cool.
circumnavigate it because the ferries come in and out, but they make this little loop so you can complete the 8.2 mile distance. And you can do it as a relay or as a solo person. So of course I'm like, I swim all the time. Let me just swim. And I swim in open water. And so I'm gonna do it by myself, right? And
Okay.
I have
Okay.
swum a decent amount,
Yeah.
and for me, it's like I can just keep swimming again, like at a consistent pace. And I swim in cooler water, right, most of the time. But the water flipped as it can do in northern Michigan, and it was like 15 degrees colder on the day of. And we get in, and it's a super chop, and I'm swimming, and even the first mile, I was like, well, this is not fun, right? Kind of like your knees, like.
Yeah.
And I said, but okay, right? Just keep swimming, right? Dory, the
Yeah.
bluefish. And
Yes.
I
Yeah.
paused every mile to take on a little, nutrition, and you can stand out. Like, it's thankfully they make it so you can stand and walk at any point for safety purpose. And by mile three, I'm going to reinflate my buoy, right? Because you have to have a safety buoy. And I can't use the muscles of my mouth, right? Like, I
You're
have
too cold.
basically entered into hypothermia.
Oh my
And I'm
God.
looking around and I'm thinking, this doesn't make any sense. Like, A, like physiologically, it's not wise, and B, I am not having fun. And
Yeah.
I thought, swimming is my happy place. Like, I refuse to put this on swimming. And so I walked out and I checked out because you have to tell people, right, for safety measures that you're there. And I said, I
Yeah.
think I'm done. And I realized that I swum as a relay, I would have completed more than my portion, of the
Oh,
relay. And
there you go.
plenty of people
Yeah.
finished it, right? Like, some people finished it with the
Yeah.
wetsuit. It was doable. Some people had to pause, right, and like rewarm.
Yeah.
One lady, it took her like 10 hours. Like, she just kept getting out, and and she was from Florida. It was a whole thing.
Wow.
And I let myself stop, and even that, I was like, what, I'm really proud of myself actually for ending this, sooner, and also holding that space for swimming. Because swimming for me was never competitive like that, even though, yes, in triathlon it's part of it.
Yeah.
but that was never where the race was won for me. And I thought, why did I do that?
Yep.
And I'm okay that I gave it a go, and it's funny because I got a sweatshirt and I was like, can I even wear this? I was like, well, I did swim. I didn't,
You did.
I did the Mackinac Islands.
Yeah. That
and
was a pretty
and then
far swim.
today, as a counter example, I went for a swim. I was going to swim this 1,500 yards and it seemed calm, right? So I'm thinking it's going to be a great swim. And it was one of those like secret chops, right? Like it's just like at the surface level and the current. I'm like, and again, guys, I was getting to the halfway point. I was like, I'm not having fun. But in that moment, I thought, okay, I know it has a much sooner endpoint and I would like to enjoy it. And I got to
Yeah.
get home, right? It's like I had
Yeah.
swum the out and I had to do the back. And so I did. I just paused and I said, okay, I'm going to choose to enjoy this, right? Like, and so there are those moments, right, where you can let yourself just say, I'm done, right? And give yourself permission to do that. And then the moment to say, again, the check in, because it really wasn't safe, right? The back island swim, like from a safety perspective, I needed to
Yeah.
make that choice. But today, it was just annoying. Like
Yeah.
I could do it. The water was actually very lovely, temperature wise. And I was just irritated because I was thinking it was going to be a nice, easy swim, and it was harder. And so I said, okay, this is you just, being moody and you got to swim back anyway. So let's enjoy the
Yeah.
swim back. And I hope through all of that, people can hear there are many options, right? So sometimes you do have to evaluate and say, like, this isn't right, right? You might have some pain in a race where it's like, I should stop, right? Or like you said, it might be super hot and checking in to see if that's okay and permission to be done. But if you can check in and say, right, is this a safety factor or is this really just a mindset moment? And I think that's where mindful marathon comes in so strong, is to say, how can I bring enjoyment to this, right? Even if it's not ideal conditions, but it's doable, right? It's
Yeah.
survivable, it's sustainable. And maybe with your niece, right? Saying, yeah, like, why do we have fun in Disney? Because it was really hot there too, right? Like,
It
and it
was.
wasn't ideal conditions. We had fun, right? Because we were at Disney or we were chatting or like,
We were
and
chatting
you could
and our
bring that
mind was
to
not
other
on it,
spaces
and
too.
there were things every
Yeah.
mile to take our mind
Hmm.
off of it and
Yeah,
music
exactly.
and
And so you
her
could bring that to other
chit-chatting and
races with
telling
her.
jokes. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. So, yes. But yeah, if your body is frozen,
Right.
maybe stop.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's right.
Yeah.
And it is hard, yeah, for most of the listeners out there who are like us, potentially high
Hmm.
achieving professionals, like it's hard to
Hmm.
like put the brakes on sometimes
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
whatever whatever
Yeah, and that could be
endeavor.
dangerous, right? We're trying to encourage people to run, but I think the permission to stop is really important to have before you start.
Yeah.
So you're doing it because you're choosing, right? You're doing
Yeah.
it because, again, it's still working for you. Because we are, right? Especially if many of your participants, are physicians or otherwise, and there is no real stop, right? It's like just fight through and grit through. That's great, right? And there's stick to itiveness, and there is times you have to override the pain in running, but also that wisdom to discern between the two, I think is really important, especially if you're recalibrating, because same for the run when you're slower than you were. It's like, am I miserable because again, I think I should be running this pace. It's 2 minutes slower per
Yeah.
mile. And is there room to recalibrate that? Or am I miserable because like something's not right? And to be able to tune into those spaces, I think is really important because we have often checked out from our bodies,
Yep.
and so that's a way to really check back in and say, oh, I'm just grumpy because, right, the pace isn't quite where I want it to be. And I can work with that. Or man, my body is signaling me to something else here.
Yeah. And I think that can be where a coach is really helpful too, because sometimes you
Hmm.
just need a third party, well, someone who is not you to like,
Yeah.
look at the data and
Hmm.
find your blind spots
Yeah. And I
and
will
give
say
you,
on that swim day, I call, and these are my family members, almost for a little nut permission. I was like, I think I'm going to stop, and expecting that I don't know what to say, like, you can do it. And they were all like, that's fine. Like, that sounds
yeah,
reasonable.
yeah,
Please do that. And it is, right? Like, important to have sometimes an objective measure of that. And maybe not always in the moment, but absolutely in advance, right? And having that plan to, like, here's what it looks like, to feel motivated to keep going and what hard stops might look like for me.
yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I think we could probably talk for 3 more hours. Maybe
Oh,
we'll do
yeah.
another episode, but tell everybody where
Absolutely.
they can find you and about your coaching program.
Absolutely. So many places. Well, This Osteopathic Life is the main hub. I have a website, podcast, blog, and CME program. So for physicians and APPs out there, we have coaching available that has CME alongside it, group, individual, and didactic sessions. So you can look at that on the website. I also have This Osteopathic Life on Facebook and Instagram, and then also Live Inconceivable, the space where I actually post most of my stuff on Instagram. It's really my personal page, but just inspirational, and you'll find me in a lot of sweaty reels there. So if you want to talk fitness specifically, that's usually the medium through which you can experience that too.
I love following along there. And
Yes. Well,
I
thank
will
you.
put all your links here and the podcast as well.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for all you do. And I look forward to hearing about your next races.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us, sharing a little bit of your story, and we'll see. We can always do a part two.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we will catch you next week. If today's episode has you feeling inspired to start or restart your running journey, I'd love for you to join me for my upcoming workshop, The Confident Runner Formula: 5 Secrets to Training for Your Next Race. We're going to dive deeper into the strategies I use with my athletes so that you can train smarter and not harder, run stronger, and feel more confident on your race day. You can grab a spot at the link that I'll leave in the show notes. And if you have a fall 10K on your radar, a 10K is 6.2 miles, my 10K Your Way program is coming soon. I'm super excited about it. It's going to be an 8-week group program leading up to the Run the Bridge 10K event here in Philadelphia on November 2nd. If you are local to the area, we're going to have some in-person group runs, but if you are not local to the area, the race actually has a virtual option, so this group is open to anyone wanting to train for a 10K. You can pop your name onto the waitlist now so that you're the first to know when registration opens and get all of the bonuses and the discounts associated with that. So you'll find both of those links for the workshop and the 10K Your Way program waiting for you in the show notes. I can't wait to help you train for your next race, no matter your starting point. So thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next week. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a friend. And if you have a moment, please rate and review the podcast so that we can reach and encourage others to tie on their sneakers and join us out there on a run. See you next time.